With humble hearts, leadership at Florida A&M University College of Law graciously accepted the desk used by the late civil rights defense attorney Alexander Akerman Jr. as he fought against racism, prejudice, and hatred in the 1940s and 50s. The historic desk is a gift from the Apopka Historical Society, and here to tell us about this piece of history is Reginald Mitchell, Senior Instructor and Donor Relations Officer at FAMU Law. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, who was Alexander Akerman Jr.?
He was a guy that was from essentially a royal family of law that could have just gone on and been famous for doing things in the law, but he chose to take the road less traveled and took on a lot of civil rights in Florida, and it was very historic at the time. So there are two major things that he took on that we can talk about, but he did some things that he didn't necessarily have to do, and we're appreciative for that.
So you mentioned the Akerman family was sort of like royalty. What was their significance in the law?
I mean, starting probably as early as I know with the grandfather, who was a Confederate general that got to know Ulysses Grant, the Union general, and when President Ulysses Grant appointed him U.S. Attorney General for the United States. And so after that, he could have sat on that and been a famous family member, but his father was Amos Akerman Sr. And so he was a person who formed a law firm, Akerman, and that is now the Akerman LLP law firm. That's one of the largest law firms in the country. And he went on to become a U.S. attorney and a federal judge for the Southern District of Florida. And so they had several children, and he was one of those children that carried on the legal name. And he married a woman who was of lineal descent to John Marshall, Supreme Court Justice of the United States.
Wow. So one of his claims to fame is his involvement in the Groveland 4 case.
Right.
And for those who don't know, what is that case about?
It was a case that unfortunately happens far too often where four black men were accused of rape. Two of them were tried to help a couple that was in distress. They got accused of rape. The husband was beating the wife. And so what happened too often in the South went and found two guys that helped and two other people that weren't even there, accused them of rape, and two of them were essentially killed before they even went to trial. And so Thurgood Marshall and all of the North, all the outside agitators heard about these crazy cases going on, and Thurgood Marshall himself came down to Florida to take on this case, and they needed somebody within the Florida system, a licensed attorney, to take it on, and most black attorneys didn't. So Paul C. Perkins came down, but Alex Akerman Jr. took on the case reluctantly, and he was at the time a sitting U.S. representative, state representative for the state of Florida, and he was the only Republican legislature in the legislature at the time, but he agreed to take on this infamous case, now famous.
So what was his involvement in the case?
He was lead counsel. Oh. And so as lead counsel, there was this, renegade sheriff that took out some of the folks accused, and of course they were all white juries sentenced to death immediately. And after they appealed the cases and retried the cases, he was involved in doing just that. So even though Thurgood Marshall could come down to do it, he was a licensed attorney in Florida that was lead counsel on the case. And so he sat and they represented the remaining clients that were left. And it turned out to be Mr. Irvin that was the main one that still appealed it all the way successfully.
Now, the name Virgil Hawkins is often associated with Alexander Akerman. What was their association?
And the reason I had heard very little about the Groveland 4, but I'm like, that name is familiar. I don't know why. So I was involved with the research for the establishment of the College of Law, and he was the lead counsel that represented all of the HBCU students that applied to, at the time, the state of Florida in its constitution said black and whites can't go to school together. So they challenged that according to Thurgood Marshall cases in Missouri, which says you can have separate but equal, but you gotta be actually equal. So they applied to the University of Florida, and when they were turned down because of the Constitution, he represented Virgil Hawkins in law, a guy named Finley in law, Rose Boyd in pharmacy. So the state of Florida, in saying that we're not going to integrate the University of Florida because of our state constitution, which eventually changed in '68. But what we will do is establish those programs at Florida A&M. So we got the College of Law, the College of Pharmacy, the graduate program in agriculture, even though it was Florida Agriculture Mechanical University, we didn't have a graduate program, and established the initial College of Engineering. So they established those programs to keep the University of Florida segregated.
In what other ways was Mr. Akerman connected to FAMU?
Connected to FAMU. With the establishment of the law school, his desk is going to be donated to the College of Law because of his active involvement with that. And then he had a brother, Emory Akerman, that also worked on voter registration rights. And so that's what I'm familiar with, and there's probably a whole lot I'm not familiar with, but those things I know that are directly connected.
So how did FAMU get the desk?
FAMU got the desk because the folks at the Apopka Historical Society decided there's a place we need to put this desk to preserve it for historical purposes. His great connection to the establishment of the College of Law and representing Virgil Hawkins, they were familiar with that story, so they said it's an appropriate place to put his working desk at our law school, and we gladly accepted it the first chance we got.
So why was that important to have the desk there at the law school?
You know, we obviously are an HBCU institution, but for his efforts and Virgil Hawkins, their preservation and perseverance for having to do the things they did, we would not exist. And so we want to keep that historical notion going, particularly in this is Black History Month and this environment we have where we don't want to talk about things racial. So it's important that we preserve all the good things in history to notify all the hard-fought struggles that were fought in the past for us to get where we are now and to keep us going. So I think for that reason, it is most important, and we'll talk about that when we do accept his desk.
And inspiration for current and future students.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
Thank you so much for being
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And the desk used by attorney Alexander Akerman was where he wrote the legal paperwork associated with the Groveland Four and other civil rights cases. And that desk is now in the FAMU Law School Library here in Orlando on the 4th floor near the Virgil Hawkins collection.